Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this week's panel conversation. I'm really excited that you're able to listen in on this session where we're going to be hearing from leaders in law enforcement about how community perspectives impact the delivery of police services. We have a great panel of 3 leaders in local law enforcement, and I'm really excited to hear their ideas and their solutions and ways that they're engaging in their community to just bring quality of life to the community and for keeping residents, stakeholders, everybody that's involved in a community of life safe. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President for National Engagement with a company called Polco. We work with communities around engagement and performance. But the intent of these sessions is really just to get ideas from people in the trenches doing the work, leading departments and law enforcement, and learning what's working for them so that as you go about your daily work, or you want to learn a little bit more about how law enforcement agencies operate, you'll have the benefit of the ideas and perspectives of these gentlemen. I'm really hoping that you'll just pick up a new idea, a new perspective, something that you can use, something that you'll benefit from. Here's kind of how the day works. I will do a quick introduction of the panel, and then we'll kick into 3 questions that I'll be asking each of the panelists. We'll rotate the questions around. There'll be a little bit of time afterwards if anybody has any questions they want to share with each other or some additional information to share. And then we'll wrap it up. Generally, these sessions take about an hour, and I'm just really thankful that you're listening in to this recording and hopefully benefiting from what's being presented. So with that, let's just kick into the introductions. I'm really happy to introduce Chief Frank Dixon, who was sworn as a chief of the Denton Police Department on October 15th of 2018. He's got a big operation. He oversees a department of 205 authorized sworn personnel and 59 civilian employees. He has an annual budget of $35 million. Chief Dixon came to Denton with more than 23 years of law enforcement experience with the Austin Police Department, where he successfully worked his way up through the ranks and became assistant chief before moving over to Denton. He's currently serving as the interim assistant city manager in Denton as well, which just adds a little bit more onto his plate. He's a transformational leader and has been focusing on many critical, important areas impacting the community, including the creation of a homeless outreach team, the development of a crisis response model for effectively addressing calls for service involving mental health issues. Frank's a member of the Major Cities Chiefs Association and is a graduate of the Police Executive Leadership Institute, the Senior Management Institute for Police, APD's Leadership Command College, and the West Point Leadership Course. He's an active board member of the Salvation Army in Denton, the United Way of Denton County, and has been named a Paul Harris Fellow by the Denton Lake Cities Rotary Club. Chief, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And I'd love it if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more about your background.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, especially sharing a panel with 2 other esteemed leaders in law enforcement. A little bit about me. After growing up as an Air Force brat, kind of traveling around the country, I was actually born in Fort Worth, Texas. Grew up in Hawaii, Nebraska, South Carolina prior to moving to Austin when I was in about 6th grade, I believe. After leaving high school, I knew I wasn't ready for college, so I went to the Marine Corps for 4 years. Best decision I ever made. I wouldn't be where I am today without having that base at a very young age of learning leadership skills and traits in the Marine Corps. Got out, always knew I wanted to be a police officer or a firefighter. Luckily, I chose law enforcement. The 100-foot aerial ladder also was kind of a deciding factor for me as well. So that made it easy. Had a very blessed career in the Austin Police Department. Got to do everything I ever wanted to do. And I was blessed to be appointed as the chief of police here in Denton in October of 18. So just happy to be here.
Chief, you've got such an outstanding career history and all of your years of experience. Well, one of the things I always value the most is the commitment that you make to the community. And I think just kind of based on the bio that you shared with me, you're doing a lot for the local community. So congratulations on that. And just thank you so much for being part of the conversation today.
Thank you.
Happy to introduce Ed Varso. His career in law enforcement began back in 1993 when he became a sheriff's explorer with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. He was later hired by the department as a custody assistant and then as a deputy sheriff. He ultimately joined the Escondido Police Department in 2001 when he was hired as a police officer and worked his way all through the ranks in that department until he was appointed as chief in January of 2020. Chief Varso has a reputation for being a dynamic leader with a strong strategic management ability. In 2017, he accepted a temporary assignment within the Escondido City Manager's Office, where they were working on public safety, homelessness, and code enforcement issues. He's kept very close ties to the community throughout his tenure with the city. He's worked with at-risk kids, was former chair of the Escondido Drug-Free Communities Coalition, former co-chair of the Escondido Gang Reduction and Intervention Program, and he's been active with the San Diego Shop with a COP program for over 15 years. He's a graduate of the FBI National Academy and the California Post program. Chief, thank you for being here. Another great example of someone who's been really actively involved in the community, along with all of the other skills and talent that you're bringing to the table. Love to have you share a little bit more about your background, and just really appreciate your willingness to be part of this today. Oops, I'm sorry, Chief, you're on mute.
There's always got to be one that does that.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I got that out of the way. No, thank you so much for having me today. I started out being a kid that always wanted to be a police officer, and actually come from a family that's background is got a lot of challenges, and I have more members of my family that have struggles than are anybody in law enforcement related. But I grew up in a little desert town in northern Los Angeles County, far away from anything that looks like what most people picture of California, and started with Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And my wife and I made a couple trips to the San Diego area and thought, wow, it's kind of nice down here. And here I am. So had a really successful career, really enjoy working in Escondido. It's a great community. It's a very diverse community. It has a lot of challenges that come from that and how we work with our community. And yeah, that's it. I'm married, have 3 kids that range the age from 22 to 20 and 8, because my wife and I are just not very good at family planning. So that's me in a nutshell.
Hey, Chief, thanks so much. I live in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and have never been to your community, but my perception of it is just a really vibrant, active, and safe community. So really glad that you're part of the discussion today. And finally, I'm happy to introduce Chief Charles Husted, who began his public safety career in 1988 in his hometown at the Sacramento Police Department. He became the 5th chief of police for the city of Sedona in April of 2019. Not a bad place to land. Focus of his career has been on community policing, collaborative problem solving, building strong partnerships, and serving others. He learned early in his tenure that to be effective in policing, you got to build sustainable outcomes. And in order to do that, you really have to work closely within the community, building trust, being purposeful about involving outside stakeholders. He's created, led, and participated in a multitude of working groups with the objective of identifying and implementing solutions using a systematic problem-solving model. His public safety career has been built on a foundation of selfless service, a heart for others, an authentic commitment to making a meaningful difference in our society. Chief, thank you for your participation today, and would certainly love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Nice to see you guys, Ed and Frank. Came to Sedona about 2.5 years ago. I grew up, born and raised in Sacramento, and I was a kid and going through high school. In my brain and my aspirations, I was going to be a pediatrician. And my best friend and I took some classes at the junior college because I didn't have pediatrician grades or pediatrician money. So we started at the junior college and we took a criminal justice introduction class, thinking it'd be an easy grade to boost our GPA. A recruiter came in and we both applied and both got hired by the Sacramento Police Department. Fast forward, he's now the chief of police there, going to retire end of this year. He didn't become the businessman that he thought he was going to be. And, just getting into policing and serving the community that I grew up in was just a natural fit. I've had so many confirmations throughout my career that I know in my heart that this is the service that I'm supposed to do in my life. And I kind of have a personal mantra that tomorrow's not promised. So what are you doing today to make a difference? And so that's how I look at police service. I'm very thankful to have been given this opportunity to come to Sedona. I really, well, that was not on my radar. I was very happy where I was, and a friend of mine talked me into taking a look at it, and I'm so thankful that she did. And I think it proves that things happen for a reason. We don't always know why these things happen, but very thankful to be here. Sedona is an incredible community, but the work remains. It's different than Sacramento, very different, but the commitment to work and trying to improve our immediate community, but also be an influence to society at large is a priority. So that's what we try to do on a daily basis.
That's great, Chief. Thanks so much. I'm just really excited. All of you are bringing such talent and such great, rich experience. This is going to be a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. So let's kind of jump into it. The topic we're exploring today is putting police needs and expectations into a community context. I was a city manager for over 30 years in Minnesota, and throughout my career, the importance of public safety and the role that they play in just building a quality community of life in every aspect had such fundamental impacts on whether you're going to be successful or not. And it wasn't just around law enforcement, it's really around building a culture and helping people to feel like they're part of the community. And the respect that I gained in the leadership of folks like you in helping to lead a department in a service that in so many cases the public just simply takes for granted because they're assuming that all of those things are going to be taken care of until there's something that happens in your community. And then you really find out whether or not you have a connected community or not. But the role that you play in leading departments and the role that public safety plays just generally is just so impactful on the quality of life, people's return on their investment in the community. And when issues come up and issues happen, the impacts of those issues can be generational. And so it's just really, really critical that these relationships are built, that public safety is provided for in a meaningful and authentic and a positive, equitable, all of those kinds of things that you all recognize and respect. And so I'm really happy to have this conversation today about how do you do that and how do you involve residents in that decision-making process. In the work I do, we do a lot of research around performance with departments. And I wanted to share this chart with you because it really is it shows the shift of what's happened in the country between 2018 and 2020. We have a tool that's called the National Police Services Survey, and it's really designed to get resident sentiment around how they're looking at their local police services in all respects. And it's kind of a deep dive in how your community is feeling, and it allows you to kind of cut through all the community noise that so many communities are being challenged by right now. These are where the priorities fall out, kind of pre and post George Floyd. And you can see the shifts in the overall priorities, with school safety and security remaining the top priority across all races, incomes, genders in the country. And you can go down the chart to see where the priorities are. What's really interesting and what kind of ties into the conversation today is the areas that increased in priority over the course of the last couple of years. And that is increasing connections with the community and increasing resident accessibility to police. In other words, it's residents that are actually wanting to develop better relationships, stronger relationships, better connections with the law enforcement departments so that you can get into more community problem solving. And all of you in your background information that you shared with me talked in one way or another about the value and the importance of that because of the role it plays in building trust, building those community connections and all of those kinds of things. And so I'm really excited about jumping into the questions and getting your perspectives on these three questions. Number one, what role does the community play in guiding and influencing the delivery of local police services? I've had a lot of police chiefs that have said, you know, once you understand what those issues are, it's just as important to figure out how do you manage those community expectations, because you can't accomplish everything overnight. And so how do you go about managing community expectations? And then finally, you know, what tools are you finding successful for understanding what residents want, what their priorities are, and how you track your performance? And when you think about this one, if you could think about how you're reaching those marginal communities in your environments, those harder to reach populations, if there's any tips that you can share about what you're finding helpful in that regard, that would be really, really helpful to share today. So let's kick into the first question. And Chief Dixon, I'd like to start with you. Can you talk about the role the community plays in guiding and influencing police services in Denton?
I'll tell you, that's a great question. In Denton, we're such a diverse community because we're the home of two major universities, one being University of North Texas, the other being Texas Women's University. We have an influx of about 40 to 50,000 students during the school year, which takes our population from about 141 to about close to 200,000. With that being said, it really has an impact on how we deliver police service because every part of our community, every neighborhood, their vision of what good policing is, it varies, right? So in the student population, they want to be more actively engaged. They want to have more discussions. They want to be like knee deep in policing within their community. Our older residents in the city, they don't need as much of the one-on-one conversations as much as their quality of life. So the speeding issues, the noise issues, the growth, the roads, the infrastructure, that's what's important to them. Our immigrant community, there's a big fear there with everything that's been going on politically in the last 2 years. So they want to know that they can trust the police to be able to come forward as witnesses or victims in crimes, give us information, and we're not going to take them away from their families and turn them over to ICE and deport them. So it's really important that we understand what the different segments of our community, how they're made up, how they communicate, how they want to be communicated with, and then what's important to them. We've gotten away from taking the stats that we get and going into communities and saying, hey, your number one priority that we're looking at in your neighborhood is car burglaries. Well, to them, it may not be car burglaries, it may be graffiti. It may be trash cans being left out on the corner. So we've gotten kind of moved away from assuming that our data is the data that's important to them, and we let them drive the conversation about what's important in their neighborhood.
Yeah, that's a lot of, you have just an immense amount of diversity between your neighborhoods and between your communities. Our relationship's pretty good between, as you start to kind of balance the city resident side of things and the university populations. Does that work pretty well, or do you have systems in place that allow for both of those populations or all of those populations to get involved in kind of the community activities?
We have a pretty good working relationship with both universities, and in a little bit in response to 2 and 3, I'm going to talk more about how we're getting them both actively engaged within the police department as community partners. So treating them as if they were born and raised in our city and give them an equal seat at the table.
That's great. And just generally, did you feel like during the pandemic, did participation levels go up or go down?
They really stayed the same. We didn't see a dip at all. We had to move a lot of things virtually like we're doing today. But what we saw was there wasn't really a whole lot of decrease in activity with our community across the board.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing some of the strategies that you use because of the balance that you have with so many diverse populations. So thank you. Chief Varso, can you talk about the role the community plays in guiding and influencing the delivery of police services in Escondido?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things, having started with a sheriff's department, for example, when I speak to the community, I talk about the strength that comes from having your own local police department like we have in Escondido. And a sheriff's department, especially in California, it's very common for sheriff's departments to have contract cities where they're the ones providing law enforcement services to a community. But one of the weaknesses that comes from a large agency, and this isn't a criticism of sheriff's departments, they do great work, but there's a lot of transfers because they're a large agency. And where a local police department is able to focus on the needs specific to the community that they serve. And in Escondido, we have a population of about 152,000 people, and we're about a 37 square mile city. And our community has a lot of local say in what is the priorities that they would like to see the police department focusing. One of the things that's been important to me as a chief is to be very responsive and engaged with the community in that way. But then also at the same time, we have, you know, even micro neighborhoods throughout our city that are going to have different policing needs. So certainly for us as a police department, we take a look at, you know, how do we not only understand the collective community needs throughout the city, but also recognizing that one particular neighborhood may have a priority does not impact other neighborhoods. For example, just last week I was at a neighborhood meeting, and this particular neighborhood is the only one in our city that has a local parking district to their neighborhood, and that parking district is a priority to how they have police service in their neighborhood. So understanding the microenvironment, also just not even just from a ethnicity or socioeconomic status, because we have a wide variety of that in our city as well. But how we are, mindful to the broad needs, but also the micro needs in each neighborhood as well.
Yeah, that's great, Chief. You said that the community has a large role in kind of guiding what the activities of your department are. Yeah, we'll learn about this a little bit later with the questions, but are there formal policies that you have, or is it a stated cultural value that the council has in terms of just enforcing resident involvement on? No, I'm sure it's not just police activities, but it's probably across all departments.
Yeah, not necessarily, I'd say not necessarily in formal policy. One of the things that we've been working to implement is a little bit more of a structured approach in how we communicate with the community, how the community communicates back with us, to make sure that we have as good of a feel as possible as to what the expectations are of the local police department. But we do spend a lot of time just through the course of conversations that happen with our city council members, through our city manager's office, to my office. And in a lot of ways, it feels informal, but it also gives you an idea to really get to the bottom of what people really want.
Is it an organizational priority?
Yeah, I would say absolutely it is. It's very well known. In fact, as I do chief's interviews on every new hire that we bring into the police department, one of the things we talk about is that expectation that we're taking the time to listen to people's needs, understand that people are coming from different backgrounds and different experiences, and doing what we can to serve their needs as best as possible.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's just awesome. It leads a lot to the quality of life in the community, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Chief Husted, can you talk about the role that the community plays in guiding and influencing police services in Sedona?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Matt. I'll start with a story actually from my experience in Sacramento. Some years ago, I was working with a particular neighborhood in regards to some challenges that were occurring. And so through personal experience, the experiences of those that were assigned to my area, and through data, we started formulating law enforcement kind of implementation strategies to do enforcement, to gather more intel and various things. And so we were actually, we thought, very successful. And I was looking forward to going out to the neighborhood meeting and sharing these successes. I created this great PowerPoint with lots of great work. After I got done presenting all the rest in reference to gang members and violence and guns and drugs that were taken off the streets, one of the first questions that came from one of the neighbors was, in paraphrase, that's great, but what are you guys doing about the speeding on our streets? And it was just knocked me over the head. It was a lesson learned, because the reality is having, grown up in that area, I thought personally I knew what the challenges were, but I didn't live there. And the reality is we didn't take the time to talk to those neighbors to find out what were their concerns. It doesn't negate the crime and the violence and stuff that was averted based on our enforcement. But the reality is we really didn't meet those needs of the neighbors. And so that was a huge lesson learned that I've taken forward ever since, and apply that in every application that I can. And so here in Sedona, it's much the same. Thankfully, we don't have the violence and the gangs and so forth that we had in Sacramento, but we have a lot of community concerns. And what's important to remember is that each neighborhood may have their own concerns. Some of them may overlap, but it's important to dig down and find out what those neighborhoods are concerned about, have that conversation, share the data, the information I have on my end, share that data so that you can really paint a picture and have a deep dive type of dialogue with the neighbors and and then talk about what kind of strategies. And again, I always remind neighbors that, we got to watch what we say, because it's not, well, the police and the community, the police are the community. We are part of the community. They are part of us. And we can't be successful long-term without that collaborative mindset and partnership. And it also worked both ways, is that, neighbors, we encourage them, they need to step up also and be an active part of keeping their community safe, whatever that role may be. We're certainly not asking them to do police work, but again, as the police department solely cannot keep a community safe long-term. And so we have to have those neighbors engaged and think of collaborative strategies and work together. We're all looking for common goals. The goal is to, say, prevent fatal traffic accidents at a particular intersection. Okay, so what are we all doing to that? And so we all have our roles in trying to achieve that goal.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I always hear about, and I always experienced, you always hear from the loudest people, right? And so what you think is what is highest on people's priority list may not actually be the highest on people's priority list. And you're in this unique situation where, such a large portion of your population are people that are coming through town and are vacationing and enjoying, the wonderful environment that you provide. Are there mechanisms that you have that can help kind of your tourism population have input on the delivery of services? Anything that you would suggest that worked for you, or any mechanism that you're using so that they can be part of the discussion as well?
We don't have anything specific. We get about 3 million plus tourists per year. And actually this, through COVID, the assumption was that tourism was going to plummet. It actually did not. It did the opposite. It was huge.
Wow.
And so, the mechanism truly is just those contacts and talking to people. Our motto is selfless service for all, and all means everybody. It means the tourist from wherever, and it means the gentleman that's experiencing homelessness that lives in the forest, and everywhere in between. And so having those contacts, but also we work closely with the Chamber of Commerce. We also work closely with our business partners that service the tourist industry, and so we get information through that means as well. But it's a balance, because you have folks that live in Sedona year round, and some of them are very concerned about some of the tourism activity that comes to town, because we do get folks that come to town that experience our town as if they don't live here, and they leave their stuff behind as if it's not their neighborhood. And so it really is just through those relationships and conversations that we have on a regular basis.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, cool. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Let's move on to the second question. Chief Varso, can you discuss what strategies you're using for actually helping to manage what the community is expecting for you to deliver?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a challenge to try to meet the expectations, because, a lot of times the expectations are, folks want to feel safe. They have a right to feel safe. And a lot of times they'll rely on law enforcement or ask law enforcement to do a lot more than what we really are designed to be able to do, or even legally can accomplish. So, the first part of it too is being willing to sit back and listen to our community's concerns, but also being willing to be candid and explain the challenges that we're up against, or why legally we cannot do something that even we would like to do, because we recognize it would solve the problem, but just the law doesn't allow us to do that. But at the same time, one of the important parts and one of the challenges for us is also being very responsive and making sure that we are being responsive to those needs, even if they seem like really high expectations. And one of the examples I have of that is we currently have a grant that is a community partnership grant where we're focused on one area of our city, and it's got multiple components to it. There's the typical enforcement piece to it, but there's also a lot involved with us partnering with one of our community organizations to provide additional services to the community, to meet more regularly with the residents and take care of needs that they have that are kind of really outside of even what traditional law enforcement would do. And the program's gone really well. And one of the reasons why it's gone so well is that my team has done a good job of helping lead that effort. And what I mean by that is, not doing that's not a law enforcement thing. We're out, but also taking the time to say, well, it's not really a law enforcement thing, but that need in the community, we have an idea on how we can help bring this partner in or bring this group or residents in and help guide the effort in a way that makes it actually a very successful program. So a lot of those, meeting those expectations is just, again, listening to what those needs are, being willing to explain why sometimes the service can't match what those expectations are. But then in all the other areas, when we can lead an effort to bring together resources to help solve a problem, even if we do not believe that it truly is a law enforcement issue, we can help lead that effort. And it's gone really well by doing that.
Thanks. It sounds like you have done a lot of work around building those relationships over time. Can you talk a little bit to the point of the value that you find in engaging people before the storm and the value that it brings in terms of being able to manage expectations? Because it sounds like that's what you're doing.
Sure. A lot of times, all of us, if you're a police chief, you're going to have complaints landing on your desk. And for me, the biggest wins have been so far those moments where a concern, you can see the concern coming, you can see where you're going to have an area of challenge, and you're able to get ahead of it. And we're able to do that by the relationships we've already built in our community through community organizations, through our neighborhood groups, where somebody's able to reach out to me directly or a member of my team early on before a problem gets out of hand and it turns into everybody's upset and angry, where we can actually address the issue very early on. So those relationships have been being built over years of a culture from a police department that is really embraced community policing and working in partnership with our community for quite some time.
Yeah, that's true. So true. I think of the people that had no contact, but then they want to have something fixed overnight.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thanks so much. That was great. Chief Husted, can you discuss some of the strategies that you're using in Sedona for helping to manage community expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really look at it as a blended approach, understanding that people are in different places. So for example, the trend is to really focus on connecting with folks virtually. And yes, there many people in our society have cell phones and such, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody does. And it also doesn't mean that everybody wants to connect in that space. And there are other barriers, language barriers, access barriers, and so forth. And so really try to use a blended approach. And part of the key is thinking of the evolution of policing. The traditional way of policing, again, having been in this career since 1988, I've seen quite a bit. And the traditional way of a paramilitary structure, rank structure in a police department is that your line level, your supervisors and so forth are the tip of the sword, if you will, with connecting with the community. Well, those, in my opinion, those days are over. And it's a lot of work, but chiefs and executives and police departments, they have to be a part of that. Yes, your line level staff, they're the day-to-day touch points, but to build those authentic relationships, you can't do it over a phone or an email. You have to meet people in person. They have to see who you are. They have to get a feel for what your heart is, and you have to be willing and authentic to share that heart. You can't be guarded. You can't be protected. And in some communities, it's going to be a lot easier to build those kind of trust and relationships. Others, it's going to take a lot of time, and some you may never get there, but you still have to try. So we try to use a blended approach where there's a lot of touch points in person, but then also understand that people are virtual. And so I'm a big fan of Nextdoor because it's hyper local, and I can reach out to the community that I serve. Facebook and Twitter and some of the other social media platforms, those are great to put out information, but they're worldwide. And so for me to put some kind of meaningful engagement on Facebook, let's say, well, if I have a follower that's from Germany, that's great that they can read it, but I don't need that relationship necessarily. when the proverbial, stuff hits the fan, I need the relationships in my community. And so virtually, I use Nextdoor quite a bit to kind of build some of those conversations and dialogues with our neighbors. But again, that's just a tool, and really the rubber meets the road, in my opinion, is those personal relationships, meeting people where they are, taking time. If you have to bring translators and have to kind of start breaking down those barriers. For example, our immigrant folks, they're not going to trust me just because I told the patrol officer, hey, make sure you tell them that we're on their side. I mean, that's not gonna fly. It's not gonna work. I have to go out there. My team has to go out there, and they have to see it in our eyes and our heart that we mean what we say. They are just as much a part of our community as somebody that was born and raised here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hear a lot of times on these panels, I kind of call it the little touches. Sounds like you're doing a lot of the little touches in building those personal relationships. How actively do you use Nextdoor for distributing information or helping to make sure people understand what you're doing in the department?
I would say multiple times per month. I really try not to oversaturate. Our city is set up where I have the Nextdoor account, or we have a Nextdoor account for the PD, and then our city communications manager, they manage the other virtual stuff, the Facebook, the Twitter on behalf of the city. And again, it's just really, when you look at social media, it's really understanding the amount of information people can digest, because there's so much out there where, so many people are connected. So I don't want to overburden them. Nextdoor, in my opinion, is really a great place to share information, but then start to build a dialogue about certain topics, crime safety, or engagement in the community. For example, we have an older population. Our median age is 58 plus, and we have some seniors here that they're not engaged with any type of social media or otherwise. And so it's important for us to connect with those other neighbors, that if we have a wildfire, let's say, come into our town, we're surrounded by the national forest, then I need those neighbors to take it upon themselves to go find their seniors and help them evacuate, or help them get to make sure that they're safe. And so it's building conversations around engagement. And so we use it for that means as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Great work. Chief Dixon, can you talk about the strategies that you're using for managing community expectations in Denton?
Absolutely. I think one of the benefits that I had growing up in the Austin Police Department was engaging with the community was a way of life, was built into our department. So coming here and taking on the role of the chief of police, there was nothing new for me to learn about that. It was really learning my city. And once you learn the city, starting to have early conversations within the first week of getting here, and actually a couple before I even arrived in the city, really paid off, because as someone mentioned earlier, having those conversations when you don't need them, when things are going well, really pays off when you have an event, a critical incident happen within your city. You have to call on those community leaders to stand beside you, because that is not easy. And we found out in the first year that I was here that we had two occasions where we had to call in some of those community leaders to stand beside us during some critical incidents, and it paid off. The second thing was in law enforcement, we were really good about having open houses or having community forums, but they were out of the police department. Well, communities don't want that. We've got to go out to where the community is, and especially the different segments of our community, whether it be our older population, our student population, our immigrant population. So going to, say, community centers or churches to connect with our immigrant community, you have built-in translators that are there available. Not just having me be the face of the police department, it's really important to me that our patrol officers that work those districts are at the community meetings, they're visible, they're talking to the community. Because when they show up at your door at 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't want that to be the first time that you've ever seen them. I'm not going to be the one coming out to your house. So getting to know me, while it's important, it's not critical. Knowing the young 23-year-old police officers coming out to your house, that is. So doing that, bringing the younger community, especially our university population, into the police department to sit on some of our boards. We have a training advisory committee. We have a chief's advisory board. And we also bring in stakeholders from the outside, to sit when we have detective selection boards. So if we have a detective that's applying to be a sex assault investigator, we bring in survivors, we bring in some of our partners from out in the community and community members themselves to sit on those boards. Because what's more impactful than sitting across from someone that survived a horrific sexual assault and then being able to ask you, what are you going to do for me when you come up to take my report? Are you going to be robotic? Are you going to be, is your heart into this? Why do you want this job? And in the beginning, I got to tell you, police officers, they don't like change, especially drastic change like that. Having outsiders come into the police department to have a say in where they work. But I will tell you, after the first year of implementing that, we did it in 2019, the officers really saw the benefit of that. And when you have those critical incidents come up, who better to stand beside you than someone that may not always have liked the police department, but they respect the fact that you have those open lines of communication and you have a true transparent police department. It's not just in words, it's in action. So those are just a few of the different things that we're doing to try to get our community more involved directly with us, because we're not going to be successful as far as economic vitality, economic sustainability, the overall vibrancy of our city. It's all connected through public safety, and we're not going to have that if we try to do it by ourselves.
Totally appreciate that. That's outstanding. Do you have any unique way that you're bringing in the university voices that people would benefit from hearing about?
Well, it's not an easy process. In fact, yesterday I had lunch with the CFO of one of our universities. I meet with the chief of police. We have lunch at least once a month. So opening those doors and then connecting to the student engagement, the student council president at the other university, we're connected. So bringing them in and having conversations with them, it's a lot easier for them then to reach down and spread across the populace on the campus. Hey, get engaged with the Denton Police Department. They're not perfect, but they're trying. And if we could get one person to show up, that's, they may not be fully bought in the first time they come around or the second time, but hopefully by the third or fourth, they start seeing that we're really just like them. We're part of the same community. We just have chosen to do this profession, and they typically get on board with us.
Yeah, that I understand that. It does strike me though that you're really being conscientious about learning the community and having your officers integrate in those populations so you can build those relationships. I mean, it sounds like you're doing a really effective job with that.
Well, I think the younger officers, and I think the other chiefs would agree with me, the younger officers, they want to be involved in the community. It's not trying to prod them or push them. It's really actually trying to bring them in and hold them back from trying to do too much. So that's really been a refreshing change, I think, for us as a profession.
Yeah, it's not managing community expectations, it's managing officer expectations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Chief. Let's switch over to the third question. Chief Husted, I'd like to start with you. Chief Husted, can you talk about the tools and methods that you're using for understanding resident expectations and priorities, and then how you're going about tracking your performance?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the methods as far as a specific tool that we use is we utilize the police department next door to connect with our neighbors specifically. It's a hyper-local interface. But again, understanding that not everybody has access, not everybody wants to meet you in that space, not everybody's on that space. We have about a third of our population that's connected through next door. So it's a decent number, but it's not everybody. So we utilize that to get feedback and to gather information. But then also we have our touch points in the community, the one-on-ones, the different meet and greets that are set up in, say a person's neighborhood or somebody's house, or the traditional coffee with a cop, and really just try to build that feedback. And part of it is also, and this is a big part of it, is creating that culture and that expectation that our officers are line level folks. We have civilian employees that are out in the community on a daily basis that are connecting with neighbors for various reasons, and to use those opportunities to also gather information about what's going on, what would they like to see, what could we do better, and so we use that to then have conversations internally to understand what are the needs, and also realizing that Sedona, be it a very small, beautiful place, there are neighborhoods within Sedona where the needs are different, and they make it abundantly clear that their needs are different. And so really trying to use that as a way to come up with strategies and talk with those neighbors about what they're doing to help solve the problem as well. And then when we implement strategies, we keep track internally, whether it's through our CAD RMS system, whether it's through some, kind of old school spreadsheets, that kind of thing. We don't always identify specific measured goals versus more broad kind of understanding were we able to reduce traffic collisions in a particular area by 20%, or we use kind of these broad approaches. We really don't look at it as, okay, we have 10 burglaries, we have 5 this month. Well, that's not necessarily a factor that you were successful. What are those underlying factors that we need to be considerate of within that community? Because we are tourism. We have these ebbs and flows of unknown people coming into our city, and I like to think that 99.9% of them have good intentions, but the reality is some folks in our society have a mindset for criminality, and they will go to places intentionally to victimize folks. And so we try to take all that into consideration when we come up with strategies and kind of assess our ability to be successful.
That's great. Thanks. What's the most difficult population in your mind to reach in Sedona?
Right now, it would be our Hispanic, our Latino community. The language barrier is part of it. I do have some officers that speak Spanish, so that is very helpful. But also, the biggest problem, I think, or barrier is a fear of deportation and a lack of understanding around the laws and the Arizona case laws and so forth regarding that issue. And so we work really hard to try to touch with that community, and as a matter of fact, I have a community meeting coming up next week with some of the community leaders within the Hispanic population to really kind of start breaking down some of those issues. I'd say that's our biggest challenge as far as connection.
And your connections with those leaders of those populations, would you, if you were offering up to another police chief on what's the most effective thing you have found for connecting with your Hispanic population, would that be the kind of thing you would suggest, or is there something else?
Absolutely. And I would just add to it, it's really about authenticity. It really is about letting them look you in the eyes, share your heart, let them meet your staff, that the folks that are going to be responding to their calls, it's everybody, but they need to understand that leadership is not this nebulous kind of like, I wonder who, the chief is, and they maybe see on the website and they see that, I'm a white male, and then their stereotypes start popping up and their biases and make assumptions about my life or who I am as a person. So, understanding that that's human nature, people do have biases. And, going out there and letting them see me, letting them see my executive staff, but then very importantly, let them meet and get to know the officers in the field. Those are the folks that might see on a traffic stop or might see on a call for service for something, and just really let them build those relationships. But it has to be authentic. It can't just be words. It has to be an authentic sharing of information, and it's not a one and done. It's an ongoing process. It has to be ongoing, and there's going to be hurdles along the way, but you can't give up.
That's just excellent advice. Thanks so much for kind of digging a little deeper into that topic. I really appreciate it. Chief Dixon, can you discuss some of the tools and methods that you're using for understanding resident expectations and priorities? And I'd be particularly interested in how you're tracking your performance.
Well, one of the things that we did last year, going into the beginning of 2020, prior to the pandemic, we got some technology that allows us to go from the 911 call to the end of the investigation. When the 911 call is inputted, it sends a reply to the person that called 911, whether they want through email or through text. Your call has been assigned to a patrol officer X. This is your case number. You're en route. If for some reason that police officer is diverted for a reason, they'll send a notification saying your officer has been diverted. They'll be back en route as soon as they can. Once they get there, complete the call for service. They'll give them an update. The officer is now writing a report. It's now been placed in a queue and it's now into investigations. Gives the investigator's name and contact number. But the most important piece of that is it sends a survey at the end. And it gives you a survey on your experience with the 911 operator, a dispatcher, if you have to talk to a dispatcher, and then the officer that came out. What that gives us is real-time feedback on how we're doing in customer service delivery. We have been horrible in our profession over years, and we send out these annual kind of surveys to the community, but we send them out at the end of the year. Well, if you've had a bad experience with a police officer that's not rising to the level of filing an official complaint, but something that just really didn't sit right with you in February, well, getting a survey in November or December does you no good because you've gotten over it or you've forgotten about it. Well, if you get the survey 30 minutes after they leave, you're more apt to sit down and take the time to respond to them. We've seen a tremendous amount of respondents to those, over 70%. We've gotten some really good feedback, real time, that we can adjust accordingly. We can start having conversations with officers if we see a pattern developing and how they're interacting with the community. We can fix processes along the way when we see those. And it really has given us some good feedback. As far as tracking the metrics on what we're doing, we have taken traditional Comstat data and looked at them, but we've done kind of a rolling update to the community. And as an example, I asked when I came in October 2018, what are our DWI numbers for 2018? And I think at the time we had made like 120 arrests for DWI. Well, we're in a pretty decent sized college town with over 100 square miles in our city. To me, it seemed really low. And the feedback I got was, well, DWI is not a problem in our community. Well, it is. I can tell you it is without even setting foot here. So we made a DWI strategic plan. We really got patrol focused on it. We got a DWI unit established. And lo and behold, in 2019, over 600 DWI cases. How does that measure up? Our DWI related crashes went down about 30%. But most importantly, there's some numbers we don't know. We don't know how many of those 600 and some odd people driving home drunk would have killed themselves or someone else. But we do know we didn't have at least that number of people out on the roadways impaired driving in our city. So that's been a tremendous success story for us. And then the creation of our mental health division this past year. In the first year, not only did they work over 100 cases locally, but doing some very basic follow-up with the consumer afterwards, we were able to get 3 or 4 of them back emergency detained prior to them going into decompensation, where they're back into a full-blown crisis. So we know that we diverted at least 4 cases from having to go through the 911 system again.
Do you I want to go back to your DWI example. Do you use a lot of benchmarking in your department to kind of measure your progress over time or even comparative data with other communities?
We don't use it with other communities, which is something that we would like to do. Trying to find a similar size community, because we're kind of a small city to have 2 universities in it, of 141,000. So it's trying to find another unique city that's kind of situated the same as we are, and then having that data compare accordingly. So we haven't done a good job at that.
Are you able to track I'm really intrigued by this new technology that you're using for those immediate survey responses. Are you able to track that over time to see whether or not you have any directional performance changes?
We are, and what we've seen over this past year is it stayed pretty flat. It hasn't gone up or turned it down. It's kind of trending along the same line, which I guess is encouraging. I mean, if it started trending up, that'd be a problem.
Yeah.
We obviously want to trend down, but
yeah,
we'll take it flat for now.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. I'm going to have to pay attention to that a little bit more, I think. Thanks so much. That was great. Really appreciate it. Chief Varso, excuse me. Chief Varso, can you share with us a little bit about the tools and methods that you're using for measuring resident expectations and priorities and tracking your performance?
Yes, it's a combination of informal and formal approaches. And one of the things that last year, as there were a lot of national conversations going on about policing throughout our country, one of the things that I noticed, and it was that we had a lot of strong opinions on both sides. You had opinions that were really strong, critical of law enforcement. And then we also had, in the days and weeks and months that followed, a lot of people in our community coming out talking about how much they supported the police. And for me, I'm sitting listening to both of these messages and trying to get a better gauge of what is the majority opinion of policing in our community. What is the majority of the expectations? And I don't think this is unique to law enforcement. I think that this is a challenge that all public sector has, of trying to get a good gauge of what the majority wants to see. You know, again, Escondido has 152,000 people, and I realized early on I'm hearing opinions from maybe about 100 of those 152,000 people. Where does the rest of the community feel? So, you know, we did implement last year a survey tool that sends out messages to the community that are actually utilizing our police service. So they get an opportunity to provide immediate feedback on their interaction with the call taker, to the interaction they had with our police officer. If a crime report was taken, it was assigned to a detective, all the way through to the very final closure of their case. And that's given us some really good understanding of those that are actually using police service in Escondido. What are their experiences? What would they like to see more? What do they think that we're doing really well? Where can we improve? And we've gotten a lot of outstanding feedback from that. And then on the informal side of it, you know, there's a lot of time spent just being out in the community. I have often described Escondido as a medium-sized city that still thinks it's a very small agriculture town. And so for me as a chief, it's been kind of fun growing up in a small town and understanding that, and then being out in the community as much as possible. Sometimes I'm out and about and I'm wearing my stars, I've got everything on, but then honestly, I've seen a lot of value from taking these stars off and jumping in the passenger seat of a police car and almost doing my own version of undercover boss, and really seeing what our officers are up against, what the community is actually saying in different moments, in a setting where I'm not necessarily recognized as the boss, but as maybe another police officer. And then, you know, then we participate in the coffee at the cop events, and in doing those kind of things where there are a lot more informal interactions, gives us the opportunity to have those kind of conversations that are in a moment where law enforcement is not an enforcement role. That's always a struggle for law enforcement. We recognize that a lot of what we do is stuff that is upsetting to people, whether it's we're enforcing the law and we're making somebody happy and somebody not happy, but it also gives us that moment to kind of have a time for our officers to show their human side a little bit as well. So that piece, and then, you know, we have a large Spanish speaking population in Escondido, and in trying to make sure we're connecting to that community and making sure that that they also are being heard and that we are being responsive to the needs in their community. And a lot of that time is spent by, you know, the survey tool I was just talking about, for example, is done in English and Spanish. So we get feedback from both sides there. And then also just taking the time to communicate in Spanish as much as possible, having a Spanish language public information officer, for example, so significant events are being reported in English and Spanish whenever possible, also helps as well.
Yeah. Do you track your performance at all in your strategic plan, or do you have any metric systems that are in place?
You know, it's interesting too with you know, law enforcement. Traditionally, we judge our success on crime rates and citations and arrests, and that's one of the things that I think is changing in our profession a lot as well. Is you see a problem in a neighborhood, and traditional law enforcement response would be go in there and just overwhelm it with law enforcement response. And then at the end of that, we would walk away and say, we've written X number of citations, made X number of arrests, we slap high fives, we measure that as a point of success. And the question I always ask is, okay, but how many people did we stop that were just trying to go home? And so we have to be a little bit more strategic in our approach. So a lot of our effort too for us is really looking at taking that more intelligence-led policing type model and really understanding where the criminal activity is, for example, and focusing on that activity in a very micro level.
Yeah, no, I understand that. That's a really solid point. Really being smart about making the neighborhood safe, right? Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that. This has been a great conversation, guys. I just really love the input that all of you provided. Do any of you have anything else that you want to add to the conversation or questions for each other at all?
Do you mind if I start, Matt?
No, not at all.
So I'll add something, and I do have a question for Chief Dixon. So one of the things that I didn't mention as far as measuring our effectiveness in the community that we do is we do quality assurance calls. So we have some staff, and also we utilize our very active volunteers to make calls to folks that we've gone to them for, they called for service at some point, and we survey them regarding specific questions about that contact, how they feel it went, how we could do better, do they get what they need, those kinds of things. And so that's very helpful to gather that level of intelligence and to track and to nip things in the bud, if you will, early on within our department. But then my question for Chief Dixon, he had mentioned that they do something very similar, but they're using technology to do that. So my presumption is that integrates into your CAD RMS system, and I would be very interested to know what that technology is, and or maybe we could talk offline to get more information, because I would love to be able to do this on a broader scale and utilize technology so that I can divert our folks making the personal phone calls to doing some other stuff as well.
Absolutely. We can definitely connect offline.
Yeah, and I think Chief Varso had talked about maybe a similar technology, and so I'll be sending you all contact information for each other, so it'll be easy for you to follow up offline.
Yeah.
And if I could, Chief Dixon, with regards to the feedback, I would imagine that you've had to have conversations, or at least with supervisors, to talk with officers and folks about maybe how something didn't go so well. How are the officers feeling about, basically being checked on, if you will, as it might be the interpretation on every call? Because it sounds like this technology does it for every single call for service.
It does. It really changes kind of the way supervisors are supervising. They're getting more personable with their officers. I think the more that they talk about kind of these little things, it helps almost prevent the large scale catastrophic events that happen after you've had. And with one of our officers, I'll tell you that he grew up in a different culture. He's from a different country. So the way that he was presenting himself to the community came off as very robotic, very stern, very aggressive. And once they started sitting down having conversations with him, they all realized that it's just not him. It's just the way that he was used to communicating, and they've worked on that, and it's really shown some great results.
Great. Thank you.
That's super. This conversation has just been great. A couple of things that I wrote down during the conversation is a recognition that all of you have, that different parts of your community have different priorities and different expectations. And so one of the challenges with this engagement responsibility is figuring out how you can understand what those differences are so that you can align your resources in a way that's going to move your department and the community forward the most efficiently and the most effectively. The other thing that really kind of jumped out, all of you recognize the value of being proactive and getting those systems in place. It really does sound like your communities have got a cultural value placed in engagement as a priority. And by doing that on a consistent way and on an ongoing way, you're able to kind of build those relationships so that when you do get into the tough times, you've got those relationships in place. I do resonate really well with the point that you never can find a better way to connect with people than face-to-face, although it's been such a unique year that we've had to all rely on virtuality and now the use of technology that makes it a little bit more convenient, or a lot more convenient, for people to get engaged on different things. The other thing I just wanted to kind of pull out and kind of remind everybody is this notion of authenticity. I think that everybody can kind of see through a line, and I'm really thankful that you've talked about the importance of just being authentic in the work that you're doing and in the relationships that you're building, and in humanizing the role of being a police chief and being a police officer, because you are part of the community, and you are about just building community life. This was a great conversation, a lot of great things that people are going to really benefit from. So thank you for that. I get this great opportunity to meet leaders every week, and you guys are no exception. I really enjoyed having the conversation. I'm going to follow this up with an email that'll give you all the contact information so you can connect with each other and get some of the follow-up data that you were talking about. Even if you have any ideas of people that would want to be part of this panel conversation, I would welcome you to kind of send them my way. I do these every week, and I try to incorporate the perspectives of 3 leaders in law enforcement. This will all result in a recorded little video micro content highlight segment that will kind of capture your comments and your perspectives, and then we'll share those on LinkedIn. And I would just ask you that you share them as well with your networks. It really helps just to kind of, those people that respect you will want to know what you're doing and finding successful. And again, I'm hoping that people will pick up on some of the successful things that you're doing, and they'll integrate it into their department. So really appreciate the time. Always enjoy meeting leaders like yourself, and just want to wish you the best of luck with everything that you're doing.